Hello, the Canada Files viewers. This is Aidan Jonah, editor-in-chief of the Canada Files. I am back on the video front now. It's a long story. I'll talk about it another time. Anyways, today we are speaking with a rather special fellow, that is Yves Engler, a longtime activist, author of 13 books, most recent, Stand on Guard for Whom? A People's History of the Canadian Military. Yves, thanks for joining the Canada Files.
Thanks for having me.
So it was quite eye-catching to see when there was this announcement from the NDP socialists that Yves Engler is going to be running for the NDP leadership because you've been a very strident critic of the party and you've really written to showcase how it's very much captured by these NATO and colonial imperial interests. So what sparked you to run in the first place? To take this gamble?
Well, the Socialist Caucus asked me maybe a bit over a month ago. My initial reaction was didn't really interest me. It hadn't really crossed my mind. But in thinking about it a bit more, I think there's basically two issues that I'm knowledgeable about, have credibility on, that are particularly important right now. And that one is obviously Canada's enabling of Israel's Holocaust in Gaza, which the NDP's gotten a little bit better on challenging than they've been historically. They're very pro-Zionist and they've been really refused to take on the issue until the last maybe year where they started to respond to the pressure from below. Um, but the other issue, maybe even more importantly, is that there's an unprecedented increase in military spending, and Mark Carney has is nothing similar to this in 70 years. This whole business of immediately hitting 2% of GDP military spending and now moving towards 5%. And basically, current the current leadership of the NDP is not able to respond to what is going to lead to major cutbacks in social programs, is going to lead to significant pushback from public sector unions. And the reason the NDP can't really respond to it is because they're pro-NATO. I mean, Heather McPherson, who's the candidate for the leadership of the establishment, she's on the NATO association, a NATO Parliamentary Association. Um, so she's been pro-NATO, repeatedly. And while she started to criticize Canada's policy on Palestine, she is, very aggressive proponent of NATO proxy war in Ukraine. She's fully on board with the anti-China policies. Has been, very much critical of Iran, at least recently with the Israeli-U.S. bombing, slightly changed there, but has been basically a proponent of U.S. led foreign policy around the world. And so they're not in a position to actually push back on this incredible transfer of public resources from social services to the military that we're in the midst of seeing. So those sort of two issues, I think I have knowledge about Canadian complicity on Palestine going back many years. I have, I think credibility in the sense that I've obviously taken on that issue. I'm not going to back down to the genocide lobby. But also, I have knowledge on the military front, and for many people who are appalled by Canada's enabling of the Holocaust in Gaza, people have to understand, and I'm not sure everyone's connecting these dots, that basically what we're doing is we're giving the monsters who've been supporting this genocide even greater means to unleash violence abroad. So the best case scenario is that this transfer of wealth to the military is just just cut leads to cuts in social programs. It leads to bolstering a authoritarian, racist, sexist institution, i.e., the military. But the worst case scenario is it does that, and it leads to greater means for the Mark Carneys, the Pierre Poilievres, to unleash violence globally and intimidation globally.
Yeah, certainly. Elbows down Carney. His whole fraudulent portrayal of himself as a supposed opener of the options for Canada to diversify away from the United States. Instead, we have most certainly seen the opposite of that, and arguably even with this push for agreements and cooperation with the Europeans, quite frankly, you're seeing a division of labor. You're seeing the old NATO proxy war being pushed onto the Europeans. So Canada jumping in, cooperating more with them is not something that the US would complain about. Why would they? Because the Europeans are jumping on board. They're going to do 5%. Canada's doing 5%. I saw it was the Denmark military. I think they're going to be able to draft women over 18. So you're very much on a open war footing, right? You're on a very open war footing, whether it's on with Russia pretty actively right now, and most certainly they are building towards China, that China is the long-term target of all of this machinations by NATO. But let's talk about this NATO counter-revolution they're attempting to do, because you see this resistance, right, in Canada. Maybe it's been very ineffective overall, but there is still anger in terms of Canada's policy towards Palestine. There is dissent towards NATO and its actions. But you and Alex Tyrrell did an article on this Young Politicians of Canada. And there's this fellow, rather alarming to me, Jaden Braves. And it seems like someone like him is being groomed at his young age to try to pull the generation behind mine back towards the war movements, back towards that, just as we're seeing this escalation for spending in a desperate bid to, let's be real here, potentially fight China in the future. So, jumping a little to the side, because this is the kind of person that if you get into office, let's say hypothetically, would be in opposition to you 4 or 5 years in the future. Why did you take a look into this Young Politicians of Canada?
Well, I mean, I should first of all say it's Alex who's really led the research on this, and he's been following Braves. And it's a pretty fascinating story where this now 16-year-old is going to the White House for national security meetings, representing Canada at different forums, meeting uh, heads of state in Georgia recently, while photos of himself with guns in front of NATO flags, and he sets up this Young Politicians of Canada that has NATO listed as its top sponsor, and he his family, he himself says he set up this sort of military type company would provide some intelligence gathering kind of services. It's a little bit unclear. Um, but I think the big picture is that there is some concern among the proponents of NATO. Polling does show that younger people are significantly less supportive of sort of Washington's worldview. It's very well documented, obviously, on Palestine. We've seen lots and lots showing that in Canada, US, but it also seems to be the case. There was this polls cited in the National Post about a week ago on Iran. They showed a big divide, and the National Post is very concerned about it. But the NATO Association of Canada has been raising this question about younger people's support for militarism in more general hawkishness towards China, Russia, and so he seems to be basically somebody who's uh, being backed by different governmental forces as part of sort of as a sort of young influencer to push a kind of pro-militarist kind of position. The big picture here is also that the forces of militarism in this country have so much greater resources than the forces of peace, right? You have arms companies funding different think tanks. You have the military itself. As I've written about, the Canadian military has the biggest public relations apparatus of any institution in the country. It has its own university, it funds many university programs, it funds think tanks, it funds all kinds of research initiatives, academics, um, and the arms companies do as well. So that's the kind of context in which he emanates from, is having, and we there was a rally in front of the Young Politicians Canada meeting here in Montreal a week ago that I attended, a small rally, maybe a dozen of us, and they have it catered, and they had, they had the Maison Développement Durable, nice room right on St. Catherine Street downtown. I don't know, it couldn't cost less than a couple $1,000 to pay for all this stuff, and certainly grassroots organizations don't have those kind of resources, and it's about kind of moving up in the world. But yeah, so from the standpoint of NDP, it, I think that this stuff trickles all around, right? This is part of why the NDP is not challenging NATO. Part of why it's not well placed is because uh, I guarantee you, there's many people within. I mentioned how Heather McPherson's on the NATO Parliamentary Association. Um, she's a member of it, but I guarantee, and there's another Gord Johns is on it as well. Um, but I guarantee that this is, much more broadly within. If you would have looked through all of the staff and others of the NDP, you find that there's a lot of people who've had different kind of ties to the arms industry and the military and different kind of pro-military kind of forces.
Right, and I think the mobilization of young people, that sentiment, opposition to NATO, opposition to imperialism, is something that can most definitely be tapped into. And I think it's more and more important because we're now seeing the ramification of, for example, a China threat in Canadian domestic policy. Because in Ontario, the province that I was born in, actually the Premier Doug Ford has been utilizing the supposed China threat to try to, has been the basis of his push towards these special economic zones, using them in the capital system, and actually giving the government the ability to suspend the municipal and provincial laws and provincial regulations in terms of these economic projects. And to me, this is very much a step towards opening the door for just suppression of democratic rights outright. And this specifically has been grounded under a supposed China threat that Canada and the US need to ally together, that they need to be more friends, they need to be even more deeply cooperating, obviously as the US threatens to annex us. So the foreign policy elements, they really do stretch into the domestic. Just as, people see it mostly through the Zionist lobby, but people have to also understand it comes through the China side. And therefore, your opposition and Alex's opposition to NATO is more important than ever. But getting back on track to your campaign. So NDP, I believe it's 25,000 people you have to sign up. And if I remember correctly, it is $150,000 that currently has to be raised. Do you see a path to that for your campaign?
Well, there is no the rate the rules of the leadership race have not been set up yet. There is dissent uh, within the party structure on this, and there was a meeting Sunday night where there was a proposal that was actually rejected by the federal council, which apparently is near unprecedented around the exact specifics around the leadership race. So we don't know how much it's going to be as the entrance fee. What I'm now hearing is that they initially were talking about 150,000. That elicited quite a backlash, and that's been reduced to something now they're talking about between 50 and 100,000. the number of 25,000 people to get registered is something that I was just putting out there. Now, I think this is a long shot. Let's be very clear. My candidacy is a long shot. I think the more realistic uh, a positive impact is to shape the discussion and to push it towards away from the mushy middle and to, put some pressure on the other candidates to start questioning NATO, to start being more aggressive against military spending, to push a bit further in their criticism of Canada's complicity in the genocide. To do that, I'm just, I think I need, need to be dozens of people willing to volunteer and to support the campaign in different ways. And also, I would venture to guess it needs, 1,000, a couple thousand people to register to become members to sort of show the other candidates that it actually represents. These ideas represent some force within the party. To actually succeed, the very difficult hill to climb would be to find, to register 20, 30,000 people and obviously convince a certain segment of those who are current members to support candidacy. Um, so that's obviously very difficult to do, but it's not. I don't think it's an impossibility. I am running to impact the discussion, but I'm running to win. I mean, you're going to do it. You're going to do it with the intent of winning, and I don't think it's an impossibility. And I think that what we're seeing, some of the reaction of the just sort of like unhinged Zionist forces, where there's polls already on Twitter that say if Yves Engler becomes a leader of the party, should the NDP become a banned terrorist organization in Canada and stuff like that. I think that in fact we know that half of Canadians think Israel's committing genocide. I'm pretty confident there are tens, maybe even 100,000 Canadians who are appalled by Canada's support for the Holocaust and are completely hostile to CIJA or other Zionist groups. So if they keep whipping up the sort of like frenzy around my candidacy, I think there's a scenario where they can end up. Obviously, they're going to try to have the NDP block me from running and they likely are going to succeed. Obviously, there's lots of people within the NDP structure that would be they don't need to be pressed by pro-Israel groups to push to block me. They would like to block me anyways. Um, but I can sort of see an unlikely but possible scenario where the Zionist forces sort of lose control of themselves in attacking, and they end up just giving more attention, and the effect of that is to rally people who are appalled by Canada's support for the genocide in Gaza and ends up sort of bolstering because I think that they don't understand that there is a lot more. The media frames it as sort of this is all kind of marginal and whatnot, but there's a lot more opposition, particularly in Palestine. I think the NATO um, on military spending, there's more support too. NATO and Ukraine is more complicated. I think that that's really only one perspective has pierced through into the general discussion. China also a little bit more complicated in terms of where the public opinion is at. But nonetheless, I think there are still, on all these issues, there are major constituencies that are, not on board with just following Washington on, belligerence all around the world.
Right. And so you had mentioned the China front. I mean, we've seen the intensive McCarthyism that has come towards that community in the last couple of years with this whole foreign interference paranoia, conveniently coming as the West shifts towards a war footing with China. Now, that community, right, is that a community that you would consider trying to tap into, given the hostility they've faced from the Canadian states?
I think for sure, it's interesting because I actually asked. Jenny Kwan, one of the NDP MPs. I was in Ottawa Parliament looking for MPs to question on different issues, and I just so happened to see her, and I asked her. She's a real China hawk. I think Don Davies, the interim leader, is not much bit more open to relations with China. And I asked Jenny Kwan about the World Bank report from I think 2022 that there had been 800 million people brought out of poverty in China over the past 40 years. And Jenny Kwan, who talks about China all the time, entirely in a negative way, she said, "Oh, she hadn't even heard of this," and and so I sort of said, "Well, okay, but let's just you know presume it's true that I'm not just making this up." And she was like, "Well, I can't presume it's true." And we had this kind of like minute long as she's walking to another office, kind of questioning on this. I think it's a bad electoral strategy, let alone immoral. I think it's a bad electoral strategy for the NDP to go along with this anti-China frenzy that we see in Canadian politics, and you see the NDP regularly criticizing the Liberals for not being aggressive enough on China. And I think that someone like Jenny Kwan, who is obviously from Hong Kong, I don't know the full background story of her politics and where they're formulated on this issue. But I think she has certainly had an impact on the party being anti-China, and they just kind of follow. I think to a large extent, it's just the following the what's in the Globe and Mail, and not actually even necessarily really kind of thinking about it. So yeah, I do see the I certainly will have it putting forward different perspective on China, and obviously also, as you mentioned, the sort of McCarthyite xenophobia that the community has been impacted by. You're seeing all kinds of academics being basically intimidated out. Um, and the all kinds of community groups here. I've been to the Chinese Cultural Association, a couple press conferences there with Senator Wu here in just in Chinatown in Montreal, where they got accused of being an RCMP or being a Chinese police foreign station, and the RCMP apparently investigated, and nothing's come of it. There's no evidence. It's all just a and but they, because of it, the banks stopped refused to keep loaning the money. I think they've essentially lost their space. They
Well,
got
Eve,
some funding.
they had, I believe they had to, members had to step up with the money. They managed to avoid that completely.
Okay, yeah.
However, most certainly, it was a desperation situation for them.
And so this was just because there was some I think it was the Spanish NGO that like accused it of being a police uh station, Chinese police station. It was just
Safeguard defenders.
yeah. So this is some of the stuff that people are facing in the Chinese community. And on the foreign interference front, I said this a number of times. Um, there is a problem with foreign interference, and the foreign interference brouhaha demonstrates it. What it demonstrates is that U.S. influence in Canada has spurred the frenzy around China as part of the U.S. target China policy. So obviously, if you want to take aggressive positions against the country, to frame it as if you're the victim, that there's this, big Chinese interference and China's running Canada and, interfering and all this kind of stuff. It's helpful to whip up that kind of storm. Also, of course, it's designed to intimidate people in the Chinese Canadian community who are not on board with attack China. So yeah, I think that there's definitely people who will be wanting to see a shift from the NDP on this front, and I definitely during the campaign will be raising this issue regularly.
Right, and the protection of the democratic rights of Chinese Canadians is, I think it's escalating. I mean, you've seen Senator Wu, he's announced this, he's going to spearhead a organization against McCarthyism on the Chinese Canadian community. Really, the community has pretty much given up on the rest of Canadians jumping in to really help heavily. They're building and they're hoping other people will jump in to help. We're also in a situation, Canada Falls broke the story a few months ago, our government funded a project to develop a quote unquote kill chain that targets foreign interference, but really it targets the Chinese Canadian community. And part of this reason, and you emphasize a good point, Eve, which is that it's the voice of dissent. And that comes because people like Jenny Kwan, for example, and also the failed MP candidate for re-election, Kenny Chiu, they both took policies that were against the Chinese government, and Chinese Canadians in their ridings were not a fan of that. And so deteriorating relations occurred within some parts of the community. And they got upset about that. And then when you look through the transcripts I did, it's pretty clear that their anger came from not being able to cope with the fact that their community members get to be angry about their policy changes, reduce contact, or there might be consequences. So, the plebs, the ordinary people, are supposed to just shut up and behave and do what they want, right? And I think a candidacy like yours could maybe help that democratic voice come back for people like Chinese Canadians. But Eve, let's wrap things up really. This going forward, what would your message be to the skeptical person, right? They've seen Corbyn get taken down, they've seen AOC, they've seen the Justice Democrats and so forth. Even if they get over the hump initially, they get pulled back in. Why would people want to invest time in a candidacy like yours, right? What is their big, you know what, I'll take this risk. I'll do it. Why should they do that?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing, if people are engaged in different campaigning, different social movements, different activism, I wouldn't call on people to take time away from that to support my campaign. Maybe, when the time comes, maybe, become pay the $5 and become a member to potentially vote. Um, but if people, I think there are a lot of people who understand, there is social movement campaigning is ultimately that's what I've done and writing and stuff like that. But that there is a platform that becomes a little bit bigger because there's this institution, which is, the NDP. And this is an institution that is of course, um, totally, it's imperialistic very clearly, and totally, compromised by Canadian capitalism and other power structures. Um, but it does also have power, and so it does offer some opportunities to certainly get a bigger platform. And if the unlikely happened where you could get I would say a much better leader than certainly than the outgoing leader in terms of challenging capitalism, in terms of challenging Canadian foreign policy, in terms of pushing for degrowth, decolonization, economic democracy. Yeah, that I think that matters. And so I don't know. I mean, the we have to be when you're challenging power by definition, you mostly lose. I mean, that's by definition. It's power for a reason. And so we that has to be understood in all kind of left activism. And so you have to be willing to be prepared to be disappointed, if you like. Um, but but uh, but yeah, so I think that I know myself, I'm not holding back on my criticism of the NDP because I'm engaged in this. Doesn't mean I'm going to stop going to demonstrations that people that official politics consider uh, unacceptable. It doesn't, so I'm going to continue with that. And I'm going to be completely upfront with everyone about any, what happens. Like today, I was talked about what expecting to happen with the vetting process, and I think there's a very good chance they'll try to stop me from being able to run. Obviously, already the big fee to participate is designed as a barrier to block someone like me from running. Um, but Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I think people I'm putting forward ideas that are not out there in mainstream politics. And if those ideas speak to people, then I do people should get in touch and follow the campaign. And if you can assist by anything from sharing memes to joining one of the different committees we're setting up to mobilize for it, then please do so. But I don't think I don't want anyone to certainly to stop doing important work they're already doing, or to go into it not assuming that there will be all kinds of efforts to sabotage any success.
All right. Well, Canfell's viewers, we were speaking to Yves Engler, a possible hopeful candidate for the NDP federal leadership. Yves, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Now, how can people follow your work and your efforts?
They can go to my website, yvesengler.com, for my writing. I'm on the different social media. And Eve for NDP Leadership is the website.ca that we set up, and we're just gradually getting properly set up.
All right, that's the end of the interview, everyone. Thank you, Canfell's viewers, for making it all the way here. If you appreciate the journalism, please do give some support. Monthly, annual, one-time donations are all appreciated to help this news organization. Goodbye, everyone. See you next time.